Welcome to episode 1 of Roadmap to Writing. I'm author Jennifer Jenkins, and today's episode is all about where writers get their ideas. Buckle up and let's take a drive. Have you ever read a great book, something with an intricate plot that left you by the end of the story asking the question, how did they do it? That kind of genius can seem intimidating to a new author, but sitting on this side of the table, I can tell you that it's actually a lot more simple than you might think. Every story begins with a spark, some method of inspiration, and it comes from what we read, what we watch, what we experience, maybe the people around us. I once saw a picture of Manarola, Italy. I remember thinking, a story happens here. And then from that spark of inspiration, I fanned that flame into a plot by doing a lot of research. I remember researching what types of food was grown there and how vineyards operated. I remember researching about the history of the region, the culture, the myths, the legends. All of those things kind of fed that flame and eventually turned into a plot. And so many of the ideas that I used from that story came from the research that I did. Most authors are a lot less original than you might think. There are really 6 questions that you as the author should be able to answer about a story idea before you start writing the book. The first one is, who would enjoy reading this story? So we're looking for demographic, age, gender maybe. Are they lovers of history, romance, thrillers? Those are questions that you should know. Where would this book sit on a bookshelf in a bookstore? The second question that you should be able to answer is, how should the story be told? We're talking about narration here. Not only are we asking, should we be narrating in a first-person point of view or third-person point of view, but also who should narrate? It's typical that the protagonist, the main character, should narrate the story, whether that means it's a third-person narration where we're seeing the world through their perspective, even though it's written he said, she said, or if it is first person, typically it is the main character. But sometimes you can make a creative decision to use a secondary character as the narrator, just like in Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Watson is the primary narrator. Or in the book Thief, Death narrates that story. I love Leigh Bardugo, and her book in her book 6 of Crows, she uses multiple narrators. This can be really tricky unless you do it well, because each voice needs to be distinctive and carry enough personality and voice that the reader will not get lost and jumbled. Number 3, what is the main conflict of the story? We should break this into 2 parts, external and internal. Good examples of an external conflict are destroying the Death Star, throwing the ring into the fires of Mount Doom, surviving the Hunger Games. These are all good, obvious external conflicts. Internal conflict can be a little more tricky, but it is no less important. Most readers really resonate with the internal conflict, and often that is the thing that drives the reader through the book. It's our way of showing character arc and dynamic with our characters. Internal conflicts, I think a good example of internal conflicts exists with The Greatest Showman. That's a common film that most people have seen or have heard of. It's a story following P.T. Barnum. His external conflict is simple. He's trying to provide for his family and he's trying to make a name for himself in the world. The internal conflict is really what drives the story, though. P.T. Barnum has felt since he was a child that a little bit inferior because of his birth. He uses all of his energy throughout the course of the movie, proving to everyone that he is worth more than his humble beginnings. Number 4, what are the stakes? I remember once the very first book that I ever wrote. I gave it to a trusted friend and author, and I asked for his honest feedback. And he was fantastic and kind of told it to me straight and gently but straight. He said, Jen, this is a great story. You have all of these awesome elements. Fantasy, adventure, romance. There's so much going on here. But what happens if your main character fails? And I remember thinking, she goes home. There was really no good answer to that question. And that's why stakes are so important. There has to be a consequence to your character failing and to achieve their goals. So whether that is, I use the example of the princess in the tower all the time. So if a princess is locked in a tower and the prince has to come and save her, and what happens if he fails? Well, does she live there the rest of her days? Yeah, that's a consequence and it's negative, and you know, those are stakes for sure. But how can you up those stakes? Well, you could put a time limit on it. So if the prince doesn't rescue the princess from the tower by tomorrow, then what? Those are your stakes. And the more that you play to your reader's sympathies, the better. We put your characters in vulnerable situations. Make them achieving their goals so important that the reader will be devastated if that doesn't happen. Number 5 is you need to know your character's motivation. It's good to know motivation for all of your characters, but I would definitely say before you can start writing a book, you need to know what your main character wants more than anything else in the world. And it has to be a soul deep, bone-wrenching, like, I'm gonna die if I don't get it once. It helps if it's a noble goal, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a noble goal. What they want might not be what they need. Those are two different things. But for the character to be effective and for you to be able to write them with conflict and tension, you have to give them something to want, something to love. So number 6, setting with the character in mind. So often we will overlook the idea of setting, or we'll overlook the idea of character instead of planning for those two things with each other in mind. So your setting should complement the character in a lot of ways. Your setting should make the character's journey difficult. Great examples of this come from How to Train Your Dragon. Hiccup is a scrawny, smart boy. He and everything in his culture does not value what he is good at. In his world, it's better to be strong and dumb because that's what all Vikings are portrayed to be in that film. Because of this, we've created natural tension in the story, and it's great writing. If you enjoyed this episode, please like or subscribe to my YouTube channel. There will be many more to come. This is Roadmap to Writing with Jennifer Jenkins.